Something you might have heard is that Halloween the game is no longer coming to Australia and New Zealand. I'm going to be explaining why it's not coming and why New Zealand is involved. Australia has a classification act against cannabis inside video games, specifically ones that grant the player any form of advantage or positive effect. In Halloween the game, the player can smoke cannabis to gain an advantage over Michael Myers. So we know the actual reason why Halloween the game is being banned in Australia. Why is New Zealand involved? This is a very confusing topic since Australia and New Zealand do not have the same classification system. New Zealand has their own. So this begs the question, why is the game not releasing in New Zealand? Well, it's most likely because most publishers group Australia and New Zealand together into one market. So if a game is unable to release in Australia and Australia has been grouped with New Zealand by that publisher, it most likely won't be published in New Zealand either. This doesn't sit right with me, however. New Zealand is completely different from Australia with different classification systems and rules. The system and game themes would strongly lead to Halloween the game receiving an R18 rating in New Zealand. Something I might mention, according to the New Zealand Classification Office website, cross-rating exists, but the website states cross-rating only applies to unrestricted films, which means games refused a classification in Australia would not apply to New Zealand's classification. Something I will quickly mention though, you might think this only applies to movies since I did just state films, but in the description of video games in the classification website, it explicitly states we classify certain video games the same way as films. From a publisher standpoint, sure, I can understand why Illfonic has decided to not release the game in New Zealand as well, due to them not having a separate version for New Zealand and only Australia and New Zealand bundled together. However, from a consumer and legal standpoint, this decision is much harder to justify. New Zealand has its own classification system and did not independently refuse classification for Halloween the game. As a result, New Zealand players are being affected by a decision made around Australia's classification laws rather than their own country's regulations.